Hey everyone, this is Kelly from Nice Lady Productions. Thanks for joining me for a really in-depth lens review. The reason I'm putting both lenses together in one big review is because I really feel like they work well together. They're a great pair. And Tokina Cinema has announced that there will be a third one in this lineup, a 25 to 75 millimeter lens at a t2.9. I originally got the 11 to 20 because I wanted a wide angle lens. Initially, I took out this lens and I used it on my filming gigs, and I used it as a wide angle. It's a perfect lens for shooting in small rooms where there's not a lot of depth. But right away, I found myself using it more like I shoot with a Sigma 18 to 35, which is I like to go really close and I like to go wide. I just love the look of it. And when I did that with the Tokina 11 to 20, I was blown away by the bokeh at t2.9. I then picked up the 50 to 135, which I think is a perfect focal range. And I just immediately loved how it pops people from the background. At the end of this whole piece, there's about a 3-minute documentary that I shot with these two lenses. So let's start by looking at the reasons I purchased these lenses over some of the others that are on the market. I come from a background of filming with mostly prime lenses, so the last, I'd say 4 years, I've been doing a lot more documentary work, and I was really looking for some zooms, specifically some zooms that were parfocal. And we can get into what that is and look at some sample footage later. The second reason I was interested in these lenses was because they're made by Tokina Cinema. Now, you know from my channel that I reviewed many of their other lenses, mostly their full frame ones. I know that they have amazing character, and I was looking for something a bit smaller than that, something that really fit the kind of cameras I was using. I like to shoot with smaller camera packages, so having the big Vista primes, I just didn't see as being necessary at this time, and I mostly shoot with super 35mm sensors, although I am also shooting with full frame. Hitting the right focal lengths was key for me as well, if I'm doing documentary work or client work, commercials. So that's the background of why I went with these lenses over another brand. Okay, let's jump into the lens design. Both of these lenses are incredibly well made. The metal housing is really nice. They feel very professional. If you're going to be adding a matte box to these lenses, it's a 95mm front diameter. And that's nice to have. It's smaller than on a full frame cinema lens. The pitch on the gears is 0.8, which is standard. If you like to use screw-on filters, they have an 86mm filter thread on the front. Each lens has a 9-blade iris for really, really soft, buttery bokeh. One of the things that stand out about these lenses compared to some of the others on the market is they have interchangeable lens mounts. Now, it's suggested that you send it to a place to get them calibrated properly. But the nice thing is you can buy one of these lenses, and then if you change systems later in life, you can send your lens in and have it switched out for another lens mount. They come in Sony E, PL, Micro Four Thirds, or Nikon, and the one that I'm showing you in these reviews is a Canon EF. The focus throw, the iris, and the zoom are super smooth. Okay, let's look at the Tokina 11 to 20 wide angle lens in some detail. This lens has a nice heft to it. It's like a little tank. It's very short for a cinema lens, and it comes in at just under 2.5 pounds. The iris control is the closest to the camera body, and all of the markings on the left of the lens are for the operator, and they are in white. And on the right of the lens, there's markings for the focus puller, and they are in a bright yellow. And what's interesting is the iris gears don't go all the way around the lens. It's not 360. It's only on one side or on the other for mounting a wireless or a manual follow focus. This is not an issue, it's just a feature I'm mentioning. When you're pulling the iris, there are hard points, so it doesn't impact how you operate the lens. I really like the two different marking styles. I think it's really cool. All the footage going forward in this review was captured with a red camera. This footage is shot with a Red Raven. I just wanted to show you what an 11 to 20 is on this camera at 4K. Tokina originally had a stills lens that a lot of people use that was an 11 to 16. This adds the 4 extra millimeters, and I really, really like this range. So one of the nice things about this wide angle lens is you can really go close to your subject matter. Let's look at the iris and the sharpness of the different apertures. Unlike some manufacturers, the Tokina cinema lenses are totally usable wide open. As you saw in the opening, really nice bokeh. Keep in mind that all the footage that you're seeing is straight out of camera. The only thing I've done to anything is add 2 points of sharpness in Final Cut Pro to all the footage that you see going forward from a RED camera. Because it's shot with RED cameras and they don't have any image sharpness built into the camera. And the other thing I've done is just compensated for some exposure. Now let's look at an example of how the 11-20 is parfocal. So what that means is if I focus at one end and then zoom in, the other end will be also in focus. This is crucial for documentary filmmaking when you're in the middle of shooting a scene and then maybe you have to zoom in on the character or the action and all of a sudden they're out of focus. It's not an issue when you're using stills lenses for photography, but it's a major issue when you're shooting video. Now let's look at this lens facing some vintage bricks from the 1800s. This is an old building that I love. Keep in mind that these bricks are not straight. I love all the colors. When you get down to closer to infinity focus, that's when it's a bit harder, I find, to focus this lens, specifically when it's at 11 millimeters, because it's so hard to determine what is and isn't in focus. People that use wide-angle stills lenses often use autofocus. So if you're trying to nail focus with the 11-20, it is a little bit trickier, unless you have something that is directly close to the lens. A lot of cameras have tools built in like peaking and focus assist. The small HD702 has a lot of really nice focusing tools, and a lot of cameras also have them. The problem is sometimes they're not that accurate. So when we look at my motorbike in the distance, you can see when I rack focus that it's showing that everything in the background at one point is in focus. But how could it all be in focus as well as the truck? It can't. Not at a T2.9 that I'm shooting it at. So you have to be careful with this lens when you are using these kind of tools because they can be misleading. If you wonder if your lens is working correctly or if your camera's back focus is set up correctly, you can do a general test, and this is how. Look for the symbol on your camera that tells you where your sensor is. This is the symbol that you want to measure to. Some cameras don't have this symbol. Put the camera on a tripod, make sure that that tripod is totally level, get a test chart, put it on the wall, make sure that the test chart is level and it is exposed properly. Then you simply take a measuring tape, measure from the test chart to that symbol on the side of the camera, then set your lens to the distance that the measuring tape tells you. You'll clearly see at 6 feet, for example, this chart is perfectly in focus. And so then you know your lens and your back focus on your camera works properly. Okay, let's see how this lens performs racking focus between two different objects. So I've got my Dodge D150 truck here, and in the background, I've got my CBR 500. I'm using the small HD 702 monitor with edge focusing so that I can clearly see when it's in focus. And then this way, it's not going to lie to me. This footage was captured on a RED KOMODO. It's in focus on the grill of my truck, to my motorcycle, now back to the grill of my truck. So in this racking focus example, the image isn't moving at all, which is excellent. Now we're going to do the same test, T2.9 at 20 millimeters. And now at T4, grill of my truck, back to my motorcycle. Bokeh on the 11-20 blew me away. Let's look at an example at 11 millimeters, at 20 millimeters. Lens flare on these lenses is well controlled, and I would say has really nice character. Okay, now let's look at the 50-135 Mark II. This is a very compact telephoto zoom. It weighs just under 3.5 pounds. It has the same smooth iris focus zoom controls. I love the zoom field of view that you get from 50 millimeters to 135. It just gives you that little extra reach that makes this lens really interesting and more versatile. You got 50, you got 75, you got 80, you got 100 or 105 that people like to shoot portraits at, and then it goes even further. and then be able to reach all the way to the top of a building at 135 millimeters. Here we can see another example of that focal range. Now let's look at sharpness from a T2.9 all the way to a T22. When you're gauging focus, look at the flower on the far right. That's the one I was basing my focus on. This lens is a lot easier to gauge when you're in focus because it is a telephoto lens. And it does have a really pretty close minimum focus distance at 39 inches. Unlike so many telephoto lenses out there, this lens is parfocal, and you can see looking at that center flower that it maintains focus all the way through the zoom range. I cannot say enough good things about this feature. Let's check out some more footage from the KOMODO. This is another racking focus test. We're looking at the very front right light in focus on my 1981 Dodge D150 to my Honda CBR 500. This is at 50 millimeters and at T2.9 at 135 millimeters. The edge of my truck to my motorcycle. And from my motorcycle back to my truck. Amazing performance at T2.9. Now let's look at some yummy bokeh. Beautiful, soft, and round. Amazing performance from this lens. There's something special about the 5135 and the way the center kind of pops out any action or any subject in it. This is a modern lens, so the lens flare is quite controlled, but also has some character. I really like it. So all in all, I think you can tell I really love these lenses. They perform really, really well. I love that I can use them wide open. I love the build quality, and I love the characteristics. So I'm going to leave you with the 3-minute documentary that I shot using these two lenses. I could have shot this whole thing at like an f8, we were outside in the daytime, but I really wanted to shoot it wide open between like a T2.9 and a T5.6. And I've got Nisi filters on the front. I'm using an iFootage crane for part of it, and I'm shooting the rest of it with an EasyRig. So I really hope you enjoy this piece. Thank you for joining me for this review. Take care of yourselves. Bye.